My sister blamed me for her divorce and ruined my life. 3 years later, Karma found her working a drive-thru, and the truth finally came out. The original poster begins by saying that growing up, it was like their sister Hannah could do no wrong. Their parents, especially their mom, doted on her endlessly. They were the younger sibling, the afterthought. If Hannah wanted something, she got it, no questions asked. If they wanted something, they were told, you need to earn it. It wasn't always big things either, small stuff like getting the last slice of pizza or having the TV remote for the night. With her, it was automatic. With them, it was conditional. By the time they were 10, they stopped bothering to ask for much. If they didn't, there was no chance for rejection. Instead, they'd quietly make do with what they had, hoping to avoid conflict. Hannah thrived on being the center of attention. She'd boss them around, and when they protested, their parents would tell them to stop being difficult. They can't count the number of times they heard, "Hannah is older, she knows better," even when she clearly didn't. The worst part was that they didn't even hate her for it back then. They wanted to like their sister, they really did. They wanted to believe they were on the same team, but she rarely treated them like they were. If she had the chance to throw them under the bus to keep herself in good standing with their parents, she wouldn't hesitate. That pattern didn't change as they got older. By the time Hannah turned 25, she got engaged to Jacob, a guy they honestly thought was way too good for her. He was the complete opposite of her in every way, grounded, mature, and respectful. They hoped that marriage might help her mature, help her grow out of the self-centered bubble she lived in. Maybe Jacob could be the stability she needed. For a while, it even seemed like that might happen. Hannah looked genuinely happy, and Jacob seemed devoted to her. But old habits die hard, and within a year of their wedding, the cracks started to show. It wasn't like she was hiding her behavior either. On one visit to their parents' house, they overheard her talking to a friend on the phone about how boring Jacob had become. She said he was too serious and didn't know how to have fun anymore. To them, it sounded like he was just trying to be a responsible adult. Still, their parents dismissed any concerns. Whenever Jacob brought up her late nights or her excessive spending, they'd side with her. "She's still young," they'd say. "Jacob needs to stop trying to control her." It was like nothing had changed from when they were kids. Hannah could act however she wanted, and anyone who tried to hold her accountable was the problem. They weren't close enough to Jacob to talk to him about it, but they started noticing things that made them uneasy. For one, Hannah was glued to her phone in a way that wasn't normal. If it buzzed, she'd snatch it up and immediately walk out of the room. If Jacob asked who it was, she'd brush it off with a vague answer, or tell him not to worry about it. It was like she was daring him to ask more questions, just so she could accuse him of being controlling. The turning point for them came when they saw a message on her phone. They weren't snooping, she'd left it on the kitchen counter while she grabbed something from the fridge. The screen lit up, and there it was, a message from someone named Elle about meeting at a hotel. Their stomach dropped. They didn't know who Elle was, but they doubted it was just a friend. The way the message was worded wasn't exactly subtle. They wanted to believe there was some innocent explanation, but they knew better. They debated with themselves for weeks about what to do. Should they tell Jacob? Should they confront Hannah? Or should they just stay out of it? They weren't naive, they knew what the fallout would be if they said anything. Their parents would immediately side with her, and Hannah would probably find a way to make them the villain. They tried convincing themselves that maybe it wasn't their place, that maybe Jacob would figure it out on his own. But deep down, they knew they were just scared. Things escalated a few months later when Hannah introduced them to Noah, a friend from her new job. From the moment they met him, they knew there was more to the story. He was charming, sure, but the way he and Hannah interacted wasn't the way friends behaved. They had inside jokes, whispered conversations, and way too much physical closeness. It wasn't even subtle. Jacob seemed uneasy too, but he didn't say anything. They figured he was trying to trust his wife. Meanwhile, their parents adored Noah. He was polite, well-dressed, and always knew the right thing to say. They didn't notice, or maybe didn't want to notice, how he and Hannah behaved around each other. They told themselves that if Jacob wasn't saying anything, they shouldn't either. It wasn't their business. But the guilt of staying quiet started eating at them. The final straw came when Hannah invited Noah to a family barbecue. The barbecue was supposed to be a simple family get-together. Their parents invited everyone to their backyard for burgers, drinks, and a relaxing evening. They weren't exactly thrilled to go, They rarely were when family events were involved. But Rachel, their partner, convinced them. She thought it might help ease the tension they always felt around their parents and Hannah. They agreed, figuring it wouldn't hurt to show up for a few hours and leave early. When they arrived, everything seemed fine at first. Jacob was helping their dad at the grill, and Hannah was mingling with some of the neighbors. Rachel greeted everyone politely, doing her best to fit in, despite how little their family had made her feel welcome in the past. She didn't say it outright, but they knew she noticed how different the atmosphere was when it came to Hannah. Everyone gravitated toward their sister, laughing at her jokes and hanging on her every word. It was like she was the sun, and the rest of them were planets in her orbit. Then Noah showed up. They hadn't known he'd be there, and from the look on Jacob's face, neither had he. Noah strolled in like he owned the place, carrying a six-pack and greeting everyone like they were old friends. Hannah's face lit up when she saw him, and she practically ran over to give him a hug. Jacob looked down at the ground, and they felt a pang of secondhand embarrassment for him. It didn't take long for Noah to start stirring the pot. He was one of those people who couldn't resist making everything about himself. Within minutes, he was cracking jokes at everyone's expense, including theirs. "Hey, how's the little brother doing? Still tagging along behind Big Sis?" he asked, smirking. They forced a laugh and ignored him, but they could feel Rachel stiffen next to them. The tipping point came when Noah turned his attention to Rachel. He asked her where she was from, what she did for a living, and then, without missing a beat, made a comment about how they'd really lucked out with her. It wasn't a compliment. It was the kind of backhanded remark that made it clear he thought they didn't deserve her. "Man, you must have some serious charm to land someone like her. I mean, she's way out of your league," he said, laughing. Rachel smiled politely and tried to brush it off, but they could see the discomfort in her eyes. They wanted to tell Noah to shut up, but they knew it would only escalate things, so they stayed quiet, hoping he'd get bored and move on. He didn't. As the evening went on, Noah kept finding ways to needle them. He'd make little digs about their job, their car, even their choice of shoes. They could handle it. They were used to people like him. But then he crossed a line. Rachel was standing by the table, talking to their mom, when Noah accidentally spilled his drink on her. The soda soaked the front of her dress, and she gasped, looking down in shock. "Oh no, looks like someone's ready for a wet t-shirt contest," Noah said, laughing like he'd just told the funniest joke in the world. Rachel's face turned bright red, and she looked like she was about to cry. That was it for them. They walked over to Noah and told him, loud enough for everyone to hear, to apologize to Rachel. He looked at them like they'd grown a second head. "Relax, man, it was just a joke," he said, shrugging. "Apologize," they repeated, their voice steady but firm. Hannah jumped in before Noah could respond. "Oh, come on, it wasn't that serious. You're being so oversensitive. It's not like he meant to spill it." They turned to her, their anger boiling over. "Are you serious right now? He humiliated Rachel in front of everyone, and you're defending him?" Hannah rolled her eyes. "You're ruining the mood. Can you just let it go for once? It's a party." Their parents predictably sided with her. "He didn't mean any harm," their mom said. "You're blowing this way out of proportion. Why don't you just apologize and let's move on?" They couldn't believe what they were hearing. It was like they were a kid again, being told to shut up and go along with whatever Hannah wanted. Something inside them snapped. Years of frustration and resentment came pouring out, and they didn't care about the consequences anymore. "You want to talk about ruining the mood?" they said, looking directly at Hannah. "Why don't you tell everyone what's really going on between you and Noah? Or should I do it for you?" The backyard went silent. Hannah's face turned pale, and for the first time that night, she didn't have a snarky comeback. They took a deep breath and kept going. "You think nobody notices the way you two act around each other? The sneaky looks? The private conversations? Do you think Jacob doesn't see it?" Jacob's eyes widened, and he looked at Hannah, who was shaking her head furiously. "Don't listen to him," she said, her voice trembling. "He's just trying to cause drama." "Am I?" they shot back. "Because I've got texts and pictures that say otherwise. Do you want to see them, or should we let Jacob decide?" At that point, Jacob stood up, his face a mix of anger and heartbreak. "What texts?" he asked, his voice shaking. They pulled out their phone and showed him the screenshots they'd saved, the messages from Hannah's phone, and the pictures of her and Noah leaving a hotel together. Jacob stared at them in silence, and then he looked at Hannah. "Is this true?" he asked. Hannah didn't answer. She just stood there, her face red with anger and embarrassment. "You're such a liar!" she finally screamed at them. "You've always been jealous of me, and now you're trying to ruin my life." Their parents rushed to her defense, accusing them of stirring up trouble and being cruel. "How could you do this to your sister?" their mom asked, glaring at them. "You're tearing this family apart." They couldn't believe it. Even with the evidence right in front of them, their parents still refused to hold Hannah accountable. They looked at Jacob, who was now gathering his things and preparing to leave. "I'm sorry, man," they said. "I thought you deserved to know." He nodded, his face blank, and walked out without another word. The rest of the barbecue was chaos. Hannah was screaming at them, their parents were yelling, and Noah had disappeared at some point during the argument. Rachel grabbed their hand and whispered, "Let's go." As they drove away, they felt a strange mix of relief and dread. They'd finally stood up for themselves, but they knew the fallout was only just beginning. After the barbecue, they knew their relationship with their family would never be the same. They had crossed a line, at least in their family's eyes, by exposing Hannah for what she'd done, but they didn't feel guilty about it. If anything, they felt like they'd done the right thing, even if nobody but Jacob appreciated it. Still, the days following the barbecue were some of the loneliest and most exhausting of their life. It didn't take long for the backlash to start. Hannah wasted no time spinning the story in her favor. She called their parents the next day, crying about how they'd ruined her marriage and lied about her relationship with Noah. She claimed they'd always been jealous of her success and had finally found a way to sabotage her happiness. They weren't surprised she'd throw them under the bus. It was textbook Hannah. What did shock them was how quickly their parents sided with her. "You need to fix this," their dad said when he called them that afternoon. "You've caused enough damage already. Your sister is heartbroken." "Heartbroken?" They shot back. "She's been cheating on Jacob for months, and you're blaming me for exposing her? Are you even listening to yourself? She made a mistake, but it's not your place to air her dirty laundry in front of everyone," he said, his voice sharp. "What you did was cruel." "Cruel," they replied. "She's the one who's been lying, cheating, and making everyone else miserable, but I'm the problem? You're seriously going to keep defending her after everything?" "You've always been difficult," their mom chimed in when she took the phone. "Hannah has always tried her best to keep the family together, but you've never appreciated her, and now you've gone too far." There it was. The same narrative they'd heard their entire life. Hannah was the golden child, the glue holding the family together, while they were the rebellious, ungrateful younger sibling. It didn't matter that they had proof of her infidelity, or that Jacob had left because of her actions. To their parents, they were the villain for standing up to her. The conversation ended with their dad giving them an ultimatum. "Unless you apologize to your sister and admit you were lying, you're not welcome in this house anymore." They hung up without saying another word. Apologize for what? Telling the truth? There was no way they'd do that, not after everything that had happened. But hearing those words, being told they weren't welcome in their own family, still hit them harder than they expected. Rachel was their rock through it all. When they told her what had happened, she hugged them tightly and said, "You don't need them. You have me, and we'll figure this out together." Her support meant everything, but the weight of losing their family still hung over them like a dark cloud. They weren't sure how to process it. A part of them kept hoping their family would come to their senses, but deep down, they knew better. Within days, the fallout spread to the rest of the family. Aunts, uncles, and cousins who'd heard bits and pieces of the story started reaching out, most of them taking Hannah's side. She'd painted them as a bitter troublemaker who had gone out of their way to destroy her marriage for no reason. Some of them didn't even bother asking for their side of the story, they just assumed they were in the wrong. "Why couldn't you just leave it alone?" one of their uncles asked when he called. "What Hannah does in her marriage is none of your business. You don't get it," they said, frustrated. "She's been lying to everyone, including Jacob. Why is it okay for her to hurt people, but not okay for me to call her out?" "It's not about what's okay," he replied. "It's about family, and what you did was out of line." Family started to feel meaningless to them. How could they talk about loyalty and unity while ignoring the damage Hannah had caused? It was like everyone was so desperate to maintain the illusion of a perfect family that they were willing to throw them under the bus to keep the peace. With nowhere else to turn, they packed up their things and moved out of the state with Rachel. It wasn't an easy decision, but it felt like the only way to truly start fresh. Staying close to their family would only mean more drama, more accusations, and more pain. Rachel and they found a small apartment in a city a few hours away, and for the first time in years, they felt like they could breathe. Those first few months were tough. They had to find a new job and adjust to life without any support system. Rachel was incredible through it all, helping them stay positive and reminding them that they were building something better for themselves. Still, there were nights when the weight of it all felt unbearable. They'd lie awake, replaying conversations with their parents in their head, wondering if there was something they could have said or done differently. But as time went on, they started to heal. They found a decent job at a local company, and Rachel and they grew even closer through the challenges they faced together. They got engaged a year later, and for the first time in a long time, they felt genuinely happy. They had Rachel, a steady income, and a sense of independence they'd never had before. It wasn't perfect, but it was enough. As for their family, they didn't hear from them. Not a single call, text, or email. It was like they'd been erased from their lives entirely. They tried not to dwell on it, but there were moments when the silence hurt more than they wanted to admit. They kept telling themselves they didn't need them, but part of them still wished they'd reach out, if only to acknowledge the pain they'd caused. 3 years passed, and life continued to move forward. Rachel and they got married in a small ceremony with close friends, and they started saving up for a house. They thought they'd put their family drama behind them for good. Then, one ordinary afternoon, everything changed. They were grabbing lunch at a McDonald's drive-thru when they saw her. Hannah. She was working the window, handing out orders and taking payments. At first they thought they were imagining things, but then their eyes met. Her face turned pale, and she quickly looked away, pretending not to recognize them. They were stunned. Hannah, who had always been the golden child, the one who could do no wrong, was working at a fast food restaurant in a completely different state. As they drove away with their order, questions raced through their mind. What had happened to her? Why was she here? And where were their parents? They couldn't shake the image of her looking tired and defeated. Despite everything she'd done, part of them felt a pang of sympathy for her. But another part remembered all the pain she'd caused, and they weren't sure if they wanted to find out the answers to their questions, or if they even cared. Update: they couldn't get the image of Hannah out of their mind. Seeing her behind that drive-through window was surreal. This was the same sister who, for most of their life, had been untouchable. She was the golden child, the one who always landed on her feet, no matter how many times she stumbled. Now she looked beaten, tired, human. For a couple of days they tried to push the encounter out of their head. Rachel noticed they were distracted and asked what was going on. They told her about seeing Hannah and how it had stirred up old feelings they thought they'd buried. Rachel didn't push them but reminded them that they weren't obligated to do anything. "You don't owe her a thing," she said gently, "not after what she did to you and to us." She was right, of course. Hannah had caused them so much pain, not to mention how she had humiliated Rachel during that barbecue years ago. But despite everything, a small part of them felt curious. What had happened to her? Why was she working at a McDonald's in another state? And where were their parents in all of this? Curiosity eventually got the better of them. They decided to go back to the McDonald's and try to talk to her during her break. They weren't sure what they were hoping to accomplish. Closure maybe, or answers, or just the satisfaction of seeing her squirm. They weren't sure, but they felt like they needed to do it. "What do you want?" she asked, her voice flat but defensive. They sat down across from her, keeping their tone calm. "I saw you the other day," they said. "I just wanted to know what happened." She looked away, stabbing at her salad with her fork. "Why do you care?" she muttered. "You've made it pretty clear you're done with me." "I'm curious," they admitted. "Last I heard you were still living at home. Now you're here, working this." They gestured vaguely at the McDonald's behind them. "What happened, Hannah?" For a moment she didn't say anything. Then, as if a dam had broken, the words started pouring out. She told them about how, after Jacob left, things spiraled out of control. Their parents, who had always supported her, eventually reached their breaking point. They couldn't keep funding her lifestyle, especially when she refused to take responsibility for anything. According to Hannah, they threw her out after an argument about money. "I had nowhere to go," she said, her voice trembling. "So I moved in with Noah. He said he had a job lined up here, so we came to this state, but it turned out he was running from debt collectors, and the job never existed. Now I'm stuck here working this crappy job, while he sits at home doing nothing." She paused, wiping at her eyes. I know I've made mistakes, okay? I know I've screwed up, but I'm really struggling right now. I need a little help to get back on my feet. Can you? She didn't finish the sentence, but her meaning was clear. They stared at her, trying to process everything. Part of them felt sorry for her. She was clearly in a bad place, and for the first time in her life, she didn't have anyone to bail her out. But another part of them remembered all the pain she'd caused, how she'd lied about them, turned their family against them, and left them to pick up the pieces of their own life. I'll think about it, they said finally, standing up. That's all I can promise right now. She nodded, looking both disappointed and relieved. Thanks, she said quietly. They walked away, their mind racing. They weren't sure what they'd expected from that conversation, but it left them with more questions than answers. The story she told them didn't completely add up. Their parents had always been willing to do anything for her. What could have possibly pushed them to throw her out? Something didn't feel right, and they decided they needed to dig deeper before making any decisions. Over the next few days, they reached out to some old family friends and distant relatives to piece together what had happened after they left. The story they uncovered was far worse than they'd imagined. Apparently, after Jacob left, Hannah stayed with their parents, bringing Noah with her. She insisted they were just friends and needed a place to stay while she got back on her feet. Their parents, still believing her version of events, agreed to let them live there for a while. Things seemed fine, at least on the surface. Their parents even helped Hannah find a job and paid for therapy sessions she claimed she needed to process the divorce. Later, they found out she never actually attended those sessions. About 8 months after they left, things took a darker turn. Hannah started pressuring their parents to transfer the house to her name. She claimed it was for security and promised to take care of them in return. Their parents, eager to support their golden child, eventually gave in despite some initial reservations. But as soon as the house was in her name, Hannah and Noah sold it without warning. They disappeared with the money, leaving their parents homeless and broke. Hearing this made their stomach turn. Their parents, who had defended Hannah their entire lives, who had sacrificed so much for her, were now living in a tiny rundown apartment, barely scraping by on their dad's pension. They had been betrayed in the worst possible way, and Hannah was the one who had done it. They spent the next couple of days trying to process everything. They felt a whirlwind of emotions, anger at Hannah for her selfishness, guilt for not being there for their parents, and confusion about what to do next. Part of them wanted to confront her again, but another part wondered if it was even worth it. What could they possibly say to someone who had burned every bridge they'd ever had? In the end, they decided they needed to hear it from her. They went back to the McDonald's during her break and laid everything out on the table: the house, the money, their parents' current living situation. The look on her face told them everything they needed to know. It was all true. Hannah broke down, alternating between excuses and apologies. She claimed she never meant for things to go that far, that Noah had manipulated her, and that she was now trapped in an abusive relationship with him. For a brief moment they felt a flicker of sympathy for her, but then she shifted gears, accusing them of being selfish for not helping her now that she was in trouble. You've always been jealous of me, she said, her voice rising. You've been waiting for a chance to see me fail, and now you're enjoying it. They stood up, shaking their head. You don't get it, do you? They said. This isn't about jealousy. This is about you finally facing the consequences of your actions. Before they left, they gave her the contact information for local women's shelters and abuse support groups. If you're serious about leaving Noah, these places can help, they said. But I can't. Not after everything. Her final words to them were filled with anger and bitterness, but they didn't care. For the first time they saw Hannah for who she truly was. A selfish, manipulative person who refused to take responsibility for her actions, and they knew then that they couldn't let her drag them back into her chaos. After their confrontation with Hannah at McDonald's, they drove home feeling an odd mix of emotions. On one hand, they were relieved to have finally gotten the truth out in the open. On the other, it left them feeling drained and angry. How could someone cause so much pain and still twist it around to make herself the victim? They replayed her words in their head, the way she called them selfish, the accusations of jealousy, and they couldn't help but laugh bitterly. It was classic Hannah, refusing to take accountability and lashing out when things didn't go her way. When they got home, Rachel immediately knew something was up. She was sitting on the couch, scrolling through her phone, but she put it down as soon as she saw their face. "How did it go?" she asked. They sat down next to her and let out a deep sigh. "It went about as well as you'd expect," they said. "She admitted to everything, selling the house, leaving our parents homeless, all of it. But, of course, she blamed Noah and tried to make herself the victim." Rachel shook her head, her expression a mix of sympathy and frustration. "Did she at least apologize?" "She tried, in her own way," they replied, "but then she turned around and accused me of being jealous and selfish for not helping her." Rachel scoffed. "Unbelievable. After everything she's done to you and to your parents, she still thinks you owe her something." They nodded. "Exactly. I told her I couldn't help her, but I gave her information for shelters and support groups if she wanted to leave Noah. She didn't take it well." Rachel reached over and squeezed their hand. "You did the right thing," she said firmly. "Helping her financially would only enable her behavior. She needs to figure this out on her own." Her words reassured them, but there was still one unresolved issue weighing on their mind: their parents. Now that they knew the truth about what had happened to them, they couldn't ignore it. Their parents were living in a rundown apartment, struggling to make ends meet, because of Hannah's betrayal. Part of them felt like they should help them. They were their parents, after all. But another part of them remembered how their parents had treated them, how they had turned their backs on them when they needed them most. Over the next few days, they wrestled with what to do. Rachel and they talked about it endlessly, and she remained supportive no matter what they decided. "You don't owe them anything," she reminded them, "but if helping them gives you some peace of mind, I'll support you." Finally, after much deliberation, they decided to reach out. They weren't sure if they wanted to rebuild a relationship with their parents, but they felt like they at least needed to hear their side of the story. They wrote them a letter, explaining that they had learned about their situation and were willing to talk if they were interested. They included their phone number but didn't give them their address. They weren't ready for their parents to show up at their doorstep unannounced. To their surprise, their dad called them just a couple of days after they sent the letter. His voice sounded older, more fragile than they remembered, and there was a nervous edge to his tone. "Thank you for reaching out," he said. "We'd like to talk if you're willing." They arranged to meet at a small cafe halfway between their homes. When they saw their parents for the first time in years, they were shocked by how much they had aged. Their mom looked frail and tired, and their dad, who had always carried himself with confidence, now seemed stooped and uncertain. It was a stark reminder of how much time had passed and how much had changed. The conversation started awkwardly. There was so much unspoken hurt and resentment between them that it felt like a wall was separating them. But as they talked, the full story of what had happened after they left began to emerge. Their parents admitted they had been wrong to side with Hannah and apologized for the way they had treated them. Their dad explained that, deep down, they had known they were telling the truth about her affair, but they couldn't bring themselves to accept it. "We wanted to believe the best in her," he said, his voice heavy with regret. "We thought if we just supported her enough, she'd turn things around." Their mom, with tears in her eyes, told them how Hannah had manipulated them into signing over the house. "She said it was for our security," she said, her voice trembling. "We believed her, and then she sold it without telling us. By the time we realized what had happened, it was too late." They told them they had tried to press charges, but because they had willingly signed the house over to her, there was little they could do legally. The betrayal had been a harsh wake-up call for them, and they had spent the past few years struggling to rebuild their lives. Hearing their remorse felt bittersweet. On one hand, it was validating to hear them acknowledge the mistakes they had made. On the other, it brought back all the pain of being cast out and abandoned by the people who were supposed to love them unconditionally. "I appreciate your apology," they said finally, their voice steady but guarded. "But rebuilding our relationship will take time. I have my own family now with Rachel, and my priority is protecting our peace and happiness." Their parents nodded, seeming to understand. "We're grateful you even gave us the chance to talk," their dad said. "We know we don't deserve it." Before they parted, they gave them their contact information and told them they could stay in touch. In the weeks that followed, they had a few phone calls, brief and sometimes awkward, but a start. They also arranged for some financial assistance to help their parents move to a better apartment and cover some of their medical expenses. They made it clear that this help came with no strings attached. They weren't doing it to buy their affection or to erase the past. They were doing it because it felt like the right thing to do. As for Hannah, They haven't heard from her since their last conversation at McDonald's. A part of them hopes she's found the courage to leave Noah and get help, but they're not optimistic. She's made her choices, and they've made theirs. My story ends here. Thank you for listening to me.